the best bits of advice I ever learned was from a manager that I worked for in my probably in my early 30s. And she said, Melanie, nobody cares about your career as much as you do. And at the time, I didn't really appreciate it. It felt like a bit of a slap in the face. But actually, she was making a really useful point, and it was about responsibility. The point that nobody cares about my career as much as I do was not to say that nobody cares about my career. Of course, there are great people all around me, and they have been at different stages. But it was about the fact that I need to take responsibility for it.
Welcome. Today we are joined by the empowering Melanie Coeshott. Melanie is a career coach and mentor who addresses common challenges such as feeling alone in the workplace, needing more support, or struggling to make time for personal growth. She's here to guide them on figuring out what to do next, offering support, and making sure they stay on track. Now, please welcome Melanie. Could you start with sharing some insight into the common challenges professional women face in their careers?
This is a very interesting situation. I've actually spent quite a few years working with women on this. There are some things that we don't always do to help us. So I think, there are some situational things, there are some kind of systemic things, but I think there are some things that we don't do to help us. Things like we maybe have a tendency to take too much on. So maybe we're the ones that kind of feel responsible, or we might volunteer ourselves for things. But sometimes if we're taking too much on, we kind of lose sight of what the important things are. So that's one thing. While we're doing that, maybe we haven't considered ourselves in the equation. So maybe we feel like, oh, well, there's a job that needs to be done and I'm happy to take it on. But we lose sight of, well, what does that mean for me and my career? Or what does that mean for me and my personal development? Or even what does that mean for me and my fulfillment? So those things can be kind of between shorter term and longer term. But we kind of exclude ourselves from the equation. And I feel that's a little bit of a shame. Sometimes we are maybe not so keen to share our achievements. So we might do some fantastic work. We might get some great feedback. We might get some great results. But we're not always as happy to share these things, maybe with our manager or with our customer or with our, potential clients. And actually, because we hold on to these things, we're not necessarily getting the overall results that we could be capable of. And sometimes we get frustrated because of this. But actually, we're not sharing those things. We're holding on to those things. So it's a little bit of a double-edged sword. The final thing is sometimes we don't set boundaries for ourselves. What I mean by this, and it ties back to, again, what's important to ourselves. I guess what's important, we can be kind of forward-looking, but when we're looking at boundaries, it's actually what's relevant and critical to us right now. And I see boundaries a bit like having, a fence or a perimeter around our house and our space. And we wouldn't want people to kind of come into our garden or, knock down our fence. But yet sometimes in terms of our own personal boundaries, they're not very clear or firm. And we tend to let people not abuse these, but we don't respect these. And I think sometimes if we were clearer in understanding what's important to ourselves and respecting those boundaries and making people aware of those boundaries and holding ourselves accountable for them, I think we could be maybe in feeling more fulfilled and performing better as well.
In your experience, how does feeling isolating or lacking support impact the personal development of women?
So this might sound like a little bit of a stereotype, but I think that support from others, being part of a group or a community, is really important for women. Maybe this goes back to our hunter-gatherer days, or maybe it's just because we're a bit more community spirited or something. But I think having that support, knowing we've got that support, is really important. I think when we have it, sometimes we can thrive. We know that we've got support from other people. We can bounce ideas off people as a kind of sounding board, or we can use those people as allies for us. And I think that's really important. When we don't get it, sometimes that's when we feel it most. I think sometimes if we do have it, we don't always recognize the need for it. But when we don't get it, that can feel like a bigger kind of loss for us. if we find ourselves working in a situation where maybe we don't get on with other team members, or maybe there are people that are not like us, then we can feel more isolated. I think in some very extreme cases as well, we're almost excluded from those, or we don't have access to some of those groups. And that can be even more challenging and detrimental. So I certainly feel like groups, or having access to groups, whether these are forums within our organizations or other forums outside where we can feel like we belong and that we're surrounded by like-minded people, are really, really key for women.
Do you believe personal branding is important for women in the professional world?
Absolutely. I believe that personal branding is important. I feel that whether we like it or not, or whether we believe in the concept of personal brands, we all have a brand. And I like Jeff Bezos's definition of personal brand. It's what people say about us when we're not in the room. Now, we cannot possibly be in every single room, whether it's a virtual room or a real face-to-face room. Being aware of what people are saying about us and being able to influence and shape that. Obviously, we can't control it, but being able to influence and shape it is important. Now, sometimes what we're doing is reinforcing it, we're contributing to it, we're doing some positive things. And sometimes it might be that some small things that we do are causing a distraction, and actually they are limiting us, or they're not destroying our personal brand, but they're doing something that actually isn't that favorable. So the first thing we need to be aware of is that awareness of how we are perceived by others. We can get that from our own self-awareness. This can be how we interact with others and kind of the responses that we get, or the opportunities we get, or the places that we're invited to, or the opportunities we get. So there's a certain amount of self-awareness, but we can also get that from getting feedback from other people, some trusted people that we know care about us and care about our development. So that's one thing, is getting that self-awareness. But the other thing is understanding, well, how do we want to be perceived? What do we want people to be saying about us when we're not in the room? And I think taking some time to think about that and what's important to us, and what that means for our current performance and careers, but also our future, is really important. Now, in reality, our personal brand is probably not going to be very different from who we are, because it's about us being authentic. If we're having to be somebody else, that's probably not the best brand for us. Or if we're having to show up in a different way in a different organization, maybe that's not the right environment for us. So it probably is going to be quite similar to who we are naturally, who we are authentically. But I see it as maybe it's turning up the noise, the sound button a little bit louder. So it's a bit of a louder version of us, or maybe it's giving it a polish and it's about making it a clearer or a shinier version of who we are. But it's very much an intentional thing.
How do you empower and guide women to advocate for themselves in the workplace?
So one of the best bits of advice I ever learned was from a manager that I worked for probably in my early 30s. And she said, "Melanie, nobody cares about your career as much as you do." And at the time, I didn't really appreciate it. It felt like a bit of a slap in the face. But actually, she was making a really useful point, and it was about responsibility. The point that nobody cares about my career as much as I do was not to say that nobody cares about my career. Of course, there are great people all around me, and they have been at different stages. But it was about the fact that I need to take responsibility for it. Sorry, I forgot silly
Is that
reactions
you?
that sometimes. Yeah, I will try not to talk with my hands, because I get all kinds of funny reactions. But I guess the point is that we all need to take responsibility for our own careers. And sometimes that means, asking for feedback. Sometimes that means putting ourselves forward for a promotion or an opportunity that maybe we won't get. Sometimes that means, taking on something that scares us, that's really outside of our comfort zone, as a growth opportunity. So it is important for us to advocate for our own careers, our own development. If we don't, each time we hold ourselves back a little bit, we could be missing out. And I think over time, this compound effect can be really big. So I would really encourage everybody, firstly, just that notion of taking responsibility for your own career, but taking some baby steps forward on a regular basis to make sure that you're doing something about it.
I absolutely love it. I think we should take responsibility in every areas of our life, and we're not being taught in my opinion, at any time to do that. And that's why we arrive in midlife very unhappy with the situation, with our health, without our career, without our family, because we expect things to happen for us. And actually, when we have to drive it and be responsible, and absolutely love it. And I never thought about it actually, but it makes sense.
Well, one of the things that I encourage people to do sometimes when they come to me is they're feeling frustrated, they're feeling kind of disempowered. And it's because maybe they've been sat in the passenger seat and they need to get out of the car and they need to get in the driver's seat. And we don't always know what that looks like. And sometimes, in terms of our career, there's been a path that we're on, or we're working to other people's agenda. And it's about, well, it's time to pause, it's time to stop the car, get out and decide where we want the car to go, where we want our careers to go from now on.
That's what coaching is about. We can't go anywhere unless we know exactly where we want to go, and then we need help or not. But at least we know we're going in that direction. Now, balancing work and personal life can be challenging, especially for professional women. How do you approach this delicate balance, and what specific strategies do you recommend for managing these conflicting priorities?
I've got 2 points on this. One of them is that balance is going to look very different for every single person. It could be different for men and women, but I think just every individual is going to have a slightly different ideal balance, or something that works for them. The second point is this balance is not going to stay in balance forever. It's kind of more of a seesaw. So the first point, in terms of everybody's balance looks different, we are all human. We all have different set of roles and responsibilities, and what works for one person is going to be different from others as well. So it's finding out about what is the correct balance for us, but also being mindful of how our balance might affect other people as well. And just as an example of this, I'm a morning person. I get up at very early in the morning. I get on with my work as soon as I get up, but then I take pauses during the day to do different activities or different responsibilities. That might not work for other people. They might prefer to work 9 till 5 or within school hours or things like that. That's okay. I'm not judging them. Then they shouldn't judge me. It's about finding out what works for us. Another thing is I love the fact that I can work from anywhere in the world. And so I'm quite happy to be traveling and working at the same time, because that enables me to spend more time traveling. But for some people, they might be very clear in terms of switching off when they're outside of the workplace. And again, this is okay. It's a personal choice. It works for us as individuals. But I guess what we might be doing if we're sending emails in the evening, or if we're, demonstrating that we're away and we're still working, this might have an impact on other people. Well, we can't always take responsibility for other people and their feelings or whatever. It's just having some mindfulness around that. So that's the point about it looks different for everybody. The other point then is the kind of equilibrium. And if we're talking about balance, it's kind of like a seesaw, isn't it? The seesaw is very rarely completely in balance. I actually prefer to talk about swings and roundabouts. So I think, there needs to be some flexibility. And I think if we spoke earlier about boundaries, but if we have some guidance and boundaries as to what we are prepared to accept and not, but have a bit of flexibility around that, actually, we're going to be less disappointed and probably more satisfied than if we're very rigid in terms of what we will accept and what we won't accept, because life sometimes throws us things, whether it's people asking for things at the last minute, or an important customer call, or anything else. So having a bit of that flexibility, I think, can be really important for us.
As the professional landscape evolves, what trends or changes do you foresee in the challenges faced by women in the workplace?
So I think there are various initiatives at the moment to bring some women back into the workplace that are not currently. And I think this is amazing. I think that often women step out of their careers or step out of the workplace totally while they are raising children or looking after other family members, or just other things that crop up in their lives. So I'm aware of various different initiatives to help bring people back into careers that they feel fulfilling and enriching. I think overall there's a general skills shortage. So this was something that was around before COVID, and it's about across the globe there are different skills, different needs that are continually evolving, and it's about making sure that the right skills are available in the right areas of the country or parts of the world or whatever. And I think women can play an important part in terms of stepping into some of those roles, either bringing some of their existing transferable skills or maybe taking the opportunity to reskill, to retrain in different areas as well. So I think there's great opportunities there for women. Let's talk first of all about remote working. I think this has been hugely important in terms of leveling out some of the playing field, and not just for women, but I think for working parents as a whole. I think there's been a lot more focus on the fact that people do have lives outside of their work life, and actually there are important things, whether it's picking up kids or whether it's looking after older parents or things. People's lives have been brought into greater focus. I think that some form of remote working or hybrid working is here to stay, and I think that can be hugely empowering and enabling for many women. So hopefully, yeah, that will be here in some shape and form in the future. I think the other thing I wanted to mention is around artificial intelligence. I am not, at the cutting edge of this, but I remember my kids talking excitedly about all of this about a year ago, probably, yeah, at the beginning of last year. And since then, lots of businesses over time have adopted ChatGPT and other, I guess, AI software and things to kind of enable some of their work. I think this is a great opportunity for women. I think that sometimes we might be a little bit, technophobic. We might kind of stay away from some of these things, but a couple of different things. There are opportunities for humans to work alongside this, and whether that's developing that kind of humanness to be able to complement some of the AI requirements or an AI enabled technologies, but it can also be working alongside it. So, being the people that kind of program these tools and educate them as well. So I think, there are opportunities there in terms of embracing some of this change rather than kind of fearing it or shunning it. But actually we can lean in and use some of our humanness alongside it.
And if a woman recognizes that she's feeling stuck and wants to take action but is uncertain about where to begin, what would you suggest?
So going back to one of the things that we talked about earlier is around having some kind of community. Women, and this is going to sound like a big stereotype as well, but we do like to talk. We do get a lot of pleasure or insight from being able to talk to other women, other people in general. So the first thing there is finding somebody that you can talk to. And whether this is an individual one-to-one, it might be someone that you go out for walks with at lunchtime, it might be someone that you meet for a coffee or a virtual coffee with, it might be part of a wider forum that you join. But finding some people that you can either offload, share with, but also take some inspiration from as well. Because I think the challenge is that sometimes we spend a lot of time in our heads, and especially when we're busy and we've got these responsibilities from our work and we've got these family responsibilities and we just haven't got time to think about these things. Actually taking a pause and being able to discuss some of these other things can be hugely important. And I think if we're stuck, sometimes we can't see the wood from the trees. So reminding ourselves that there are always options. We do always have choices. We cannot always see them, but there are always options and choices out there. And the first point, by talking to other people, will quickly help us to see that, well, there are more than one way of doing something, or there could be some support in this area, or just by talking through things with other people, sometimes that releases some of the challenges in our minds. Now, of course, we can talk to professional people, whether these are coaches or mentors or other people. There are also lots of free and readily available resources if you take a little bit of time to look around for them.
Over the course of your professional journey, what has been the most rewarding aspect for you?
There have been so many rewarding elements and incidents and events, seeing that people can move on from their position of feeling stuck or feeling frustrated. A lot of people come to me when they are feeling in these situations. They don't know where to turn. Being able to help them see that indeed they do have choices, they do have options. And actually, when they take this time to kind of step off the busy merry-go-round of life or their career, it can be much easier to focus in on some of these things. So that is the most rewarding for me. And then hearing about how they've applied this. So I had a wonderful email from a client this morning that I was working with a few months ago. Yeah, what she has taken from our coaching sessions, what she is now doing, implementing. Yeah, it's really inspiring. So I find that very, very rewarding.
Lastly, for those who would like to connect with you, what is the best way to reach out?
So there are two main ways to reach out. The first is on LinkedIn, and you can find me under my name, Melanie Coeshott. I also have a Blue Diamond page on LinkedIn, but probably easier if you find me via my personal name. And the second is via my website, which is bluediamondcoach.com. If you are interested in having a free 30-minute career discussion, there are some buttons on my website, pretty much on every page of my website, that you can click on to book an appointment with me.
Thank you so much, Melanie, for this enlightening chat, sharing your expertise and experience with us today. Thank you to our listeners. If you enjoyed this interview, perhaps you'll enjoy this one or that one. And if you found it useful, please like this video and leave a comment with your questions and thoughts. Have you also considered to subscribe and hit the notification bell to stay updated on our latest interview? Until next time, stay strong.